So it is finally UFC 280 week, and what a main event we have in store for this weekend as Charles Oliveira and Islam Makhachev are set to compete for the vacant UFC Lightweight Championship. It often tends to slip my mind, and I sort of forget that Charles is not the UFC Lightweight Champion any longer. It just doesn't feel that he ever lost the championship, and that too due to a very unfortunate weight miss. On top of that, he has been so dominant in his recent run of fights, and he looked absolutely incredible in his last fight against Justin Gaethje as well. But standing in front of him from the octagon this weekend will be a man who is currently on a 10-fight winning streak, a man who is touted as Khabib Nurmagomedov's protege, a man who could very well bring back the UFC Lightweight Championship to AKA, and that man is of course Islam Makhachev. So of course, lots to talk about regarding the UFC 280 main event, arguably the most highly anticipated fight of the year as we are now set to crown a new UFC lightweight champion in Abu Dhabi. So before getting into the breakdown and prediction for this fight, let's just talk about Charles Oliveira and Islam Makhachev's respective runs in the UFC. So first and foremost, I would say that both Oliveira and Makhachev had very different career trajectories in the UFC. Oliveira has 4 extra years of experience under his belt in the promotion as he signed with Dana White's organization back in 2010. I'm not going to go that far and cover his career from the beginning, but just so we're clear, Oliveira made his UFC debut against Darren Elkins, a UFC veteran whom he beat within 41 seconds of his very first fight in the promotion. Now, the biggest highlight of Oliveira's career timeline is how he bounced back from the face of adversity. In 2015, he lost to former UFC featherweight champion Max Holloway, and within that time period, the Bronx lost 4 of his 6 fights in the UFC. And to make things a lot worse, Oliveira missed weight twice within those 6 fights. Now, this was something Charles was already struggling with in the early stages of his career as he had previously missed weight twice against Cub Swanson and Jeremy Stephens. Oliveira's career took a turn after he lost to Paul Felder in 2017 though, and it was from there onwards something just completely changed about Charles Oliveira, and up until now, within the span of the last 4 years, he has not lost a single fight in the UFC. And what's even more impressive is the fact that Oliveira's recent resume is absolutely insane. I believe that the biggest turning point of Oliveira's career and the fight that got everyone talking and where everyone finally started to take note of Charles was his 2020 main event against Kevin Lee in an empty arena in Brazil. That whole fight night event in general felt very weird with no fans in the arena, but Charles Oliveira went out there and did what he had to do as he dispatched one of the most prominent names in the UFC's lightweight division back then. And from there onwards, Oliveira's run has been absolutely massive. Victories over former lightweight title holders including fan favorite Tony Ferguson, and then of course that winning moment against a former Bellator champion Michael Chandler. And then came along what I think is the most impressive win of Charles Oliveira's career so far against Dustin Poirier. Because as you see, Dustin Poirier had such an incredible 2021 by beating Conor McGregor twice, and things finally sort of fell in place for the Diamond, his final fight of the year, as he had the chance to finish an incredible year by winning the undisputed lightweight title. And then came along Charles Oliveira and dominantly shut down Dustin Poirier at UFC 269 to retain his UFC lightweight championship. He just wasn't willing to let Poirier walk in and take the title from him. Charles Oliveira showed everyone why 2021 was his year in the 155-pound division and not Dustin Poirier's. Now, we come down to the part that has been a little controversial and has sort of been the narrative in the lead up to UFC 280. You compare Charles Oliveira's recent fights and his resume against Islam Makhachev, and you can clearly see the big difference. Makhachev, who made his UFC debut in 2014, has been outstanding since coming into the promotion, but given the pressure on his shoulders, given the fact that he belongs from Khabib Nurmagomedov's camp, you could always expect a certain set of fans to bring up Makhachev's loss to Adriano Martins in his second UFC fight. It's just crazy that people sometimes expect Islam to be immortal and untouchable just because Khabib was unbeaten throughout his career as well. I get it. A lot of it probably has to do with some of the statements made by Ali Abdelaziz, but I do think that Makhachev gets a lot of unnecessary slander from fans just because he's associated with Khabib in one way. But the good part is, at least Islam Makhachev isn't under any added pressure to defend an unbeaten streak. So maybe that is something that could come into play. Anyway, getting back to Islam's resume, I think it is safe to say that you could slowly notice the rise of level in competition he has faced, but that doesn't change the fact that Oliveira's recent fights have been against way more superior fighters. He has faced 3 former UFC lightweight title holders, whereas Makhachev has faced Bobby Green and Dan Hooker at best. So this is also another talking point in the lead up to this fight, because I think the level of fighters Makhachev has faced recently was the same level that Charles Oliveira was at back in 2017-2018 when he fought the likes of Paul Felder, Clay Guida, and Jim Miller. So yes, there is an obvious difference in level of competition between Charles Oliveira and Islam Makhachev and who they have faced recently. Now, will that experience gap be a turning point in this fight? It could very well be. We never know for sure. So this is the big one. How do I think Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev could potentially play out, and my prediction for this fight? There are a lot of aspects in this fight that could play a major role, one of which is of course Islam Makhachev's grappling. He obviously has a lot of experience in that department and in the wrestling department, having trained with the likes of Khabib Nurmagomedov and of course former UFC heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier as well. Now, I think that it is very much possible for Charles Oliveira to win this fight via a finish, and to be honest, I believe that should be his approach. Getting a finish via a potential KO or a TKO would be my best bet. Oliveira has incredible power in his hands. I mean, if you want an example of pure strength from Charles Oliveira, then you could simply go back and watch his fight against Michael Chandler. In trademark Charles Oliveira fashion, he got dropped and then recollected himself and eventually dropped Chandler and finished him off inside 20 seconds of the second round. Now, sticking to that fight against Chandler for a minute here, in the early stages of that fight, Charles got hit with a left hook from Chandler, which prompted him to go for a takedown, but it almost backfired as Chandler locked in a guillotine and it looked really tight for a second or two there. But credits to Oliveira though for popping his head right back up. Now, here is the thing. I know Charles Oliveira has insane jiu-jitsu, but could you imagine if he finds himself in a similar situation against Islam Makhachev, where Islam gets a hold of Charles's neck literally in the opening seconds of their fight? I mean, that right there could spell disaster for Charles Oliveira because let's be honest, someone like Makhachev is likely to cause a lot more damage in this situation compared to someone like what Michael Chandler did when he fought Charles Oliveira back at UFC 262. So I know Oliveira has a tendency to get hit by his opponents in the opening minutes, but he could find himself in real danger if he somehow finds himself in a vulnerable spot on the ground against a fighter like Islam Makhachev in the opening few minutes of this fight. What I'm trying to say is Charles needs to be aware of Islam's wrestling and his grappling. You already know that Islam is going to work his ass off in training to improve those aspects of his. He's already such a great grappler, but you already know that he's going to work on those aspects even further for his fight against a jiu-jitsu specialist like Charles. So yeah, Islam Makhachev's best route of winning this fight is, I would say, on the ground. Sure, he has a lot of power in his hands, but I just think that Charles is simply superior in terms of strength. Like, if you compare Islam's striking power to Khabib, I would say that Khabib is miles ahead of him. Now, on the stand-up, Charles Oliveira is definitely the favorite in this fight. His reach could play a major factor, and I believe we are going to see him maintain a certain level of distance, and you could expect Charles to pick his shots by maintaining that level of distance, because I don't think Oliveira is going to try and fight Makhachev in a closer range, as it could lead to Islam trying to tie him up in the clinch, and from there onwards he could potentially dominate Oliveira with his grappling. If this was any other fighter, I would confidently say that Oliveira could deal with the grappling, but this is Islam Makhachev we are talking about. Even in the closer range though, Charles could pick his shots, but Makhachev, if you have noticed, is really quick with his takedowns. His fighting style is pretty similar to Khabib, where he's capable of finding that one opening that could lead him to take down his opponent. I mean, Islam's reflexes is going to be crucial here. If you go back to that Dan Hooker fight, you could see that Islam literally didn't give Hooker any time to settle into that fight. Hooker tried to use his boxing, then went for a leg kick, and as soon as Makhachev found that slight opening from that position, he took him down. So Charles Oliveira, who let me remind you, often likes to mix it up with his kicks, in addition to his boxing of course, has to be very careful while trying to land a kick. One slight opening and he is going to get taken down. I know I'm probably making it sound as if Makhachev is the favorite in my mind to win this fight, but I'm still edging for a victory for Oliveira because I think Charles is going to show a different level in terms of his takedown defense, which I think could neutralize a lot of Islam's game plan in this fight. Oliveira, like I said, has way better striking than Makhachev. He has a tendency to get hit, and of course, he gets hit a lot more than Makhachev does in his fights, but Oliveira's striking is going to be the talking point in this fight. I think we are going to see him maintain that distance, use his boxing to his advantage, and even Oliveira's kicks could be a turning point in this fight, especially that head kick. Even on the ground, Charles could be a threat with his jiu-jitsu, but if somehow Makhachev allows Oliveira to hit him, then it's all over. I'm 100% backing Charles Oliveira's strength and his power in this fight. And for an official prediction, I think we are going to see Charles Oliveira pull off the victory via a finish. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to predict the round. I'm not going to predict how the fight gets finished. But I think Charles Oliveira gets it done before the 5 rounds are over and wins back the UFC lightweight title in the most emphatic way possible. The problem with breaking down this fight is this is literally the toughest breakdown and prediction you could ever think of this year because of how well rounded both these fighters are. I mean, how well matched they currently are. This is literally the definition of a chess match in mixed martial arts. So as you can see, I've broken down this video into 3 different parts. The final talking point of this fight is, I believe, going to be coach Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now, Khabib has mostly been in the corner of Islam during his fights, but as a coach, he is currently holding an official record of 4 victories and, of course, no losses while being in Islam's corner. And with wins over Drew Dover, Thiago Moises, Dan Hooker, and Bobby Green, I would say that coach Khabib has gotten off to a great start, at least from Islam's perspective. On top of that, coach Khabib has also cornered Abu Bakar, who is also on the back of a win over Jared Gooden, and Umar Nurmagomedov, who is a bantamweight prospect and is currently unbeaten in the UFC. Khabib has also coached Usman Nurmagomedov, who is fighting over at Bellator MMA and is currently unbeaten as well. So, with all the fighting experience in the world, now you throw in Khabib's coaching abilities. He literally knows what it is like to be in situations like these. He knows what it is like to compete in high-level fights like these. You can say whatever you want regarding Khabib's legacy, but you cannot deny his 3 big wins in the lightweight division over Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, and of course Justin Gaethje. Especially if you go back to that 2018 fight against Conor McGregor, which was arguably the biggest fight in the UFC history. So Khabib literally knows what it is like to compete in pressure title fights like these. So, with all that fighting experience and all that coaching experience, you could expect Khabib to completely mold and prepare Islam Makhachev for the biggest fight of his career. Because let's be honest, this fight is equally important for Khabib's legacy than it is for Islam's legacy. As it stands, a lot of people often tend to say this, but Khabib could very well no longer be the greatest lightweight on the planet, as that label now belongs to Charles Oliveira after what he has done in the last couple of years in the UFC. That debate is going to get settled in one way with this fight between Oliveira and Makhachev. If Charles wins, he is undoubtedly the greatest lightweight fighter and champion in UFC history. If Makhachev wins, we could see the beginning of a completely new era in the lightweight division, and we already know that a win for Islam is going to keep Khabib in the conversation for being the greatest lightweight champion of all time. You already know that somewhere that conversation will not be dead if Charles Oliveira loses this fight at UFC 280. But Coach Khabib has been really solid so far. He's starting to create his own legacy with fighters from his family tree across UFC and Bellator MMA. And of course, you also have the master Javier Mendez in Islam's corner as well. So, Makhachev is going to get a lot of pep talk heading into this fight. Will Coach Khabib play a big role in Makhachev's win? We can only find out this weekend. But anyway, with all that being said, that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Do hit that like button and subscribe button and let me know your predictions for Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira. And I will see you guys in the next video. And of course, for this weekend's UFC 280, which is absolutely stacked from start to finish. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'll see you guys in the next video.